All right, it is that time to look at the top 10 cards from Scarlet and Violet 151, our September mini set. It seems weird to call these sets mini sets. They're not really very mini anymore, but it is what it is. They're still smaller than the main set, so there's that much. We're going to go ahead and just start off, as always, with the art highlights from this set. We have so many great arts in this set, so it is gonna wear on you to go through this. I swear I narrowed it down. There's still quite a lot in this section. Just be patient. We're going to start off, of course, with Erica. This is just the basic artwork. I like the artwork. They used the same artist for the full art, but we are going to actually look at the full art and the illustration rare. These are just, they're gorgeous. They're both so pretty. I love Erica. I have an Erica collection for all the trading card game stuff. I obviously have to get both these cards because they're just stellar. I look forward to hopefully pulling them. Well, we'll see. I'm not getting a ton of 151, so we'll see if I pull it or if I can just buy it, I guess. Hopefully the card isn't going to get too expensive, but it's a young female in a Pokemon trading card game. We all know what that means, so yay. Even still, she's my favorite gym leader, so definitely have to collect her. But arts are great, especially I actually really like the regular full art a lot. The way the trees are in the background is just super pretty. I'm super excited for it. And of course, gotta have the starter arts in here. I was gonna just highlight the Bulbasaur line, but I feel like that's not especially fair to the other starters. I have a bias toward the real number one Bulbasaur, right? Love the entire line for Venusaur, but the art on all of the starters is just phenomenal. So we're going to highlight each of them. We're going to look at the Venusaur line. We're going to look at the Charizard line, which is, again, also just incredible. I really like how just like the what I even know what that is called, the like the deserty look for the Charmander, especially, and the volcano for Charizard. It's too good. They really outdid themselves with 151. And then the Blastoise line by Arita himself. I will admit, I'm not the biggest fan of the Squirtle. I think the Squirtle's face looks kind of weird, but the whole rest of it just looks really, really good. Yeah, they did a great job with the starters. And then, of course, Magneton, one of my favorite Pokemon. I have to collect that. I actually really like both these arts by Yukamori. These are she does the clay artwork for this for the trading card game. I really like both the ones that she did for this. So highlighting those real quick, we're going to take a little closer look at the Magneton. You can definitely see it is indeed clay. And then also look at Magneton. Yeah, really like it. Really simple, but also really awesome. And then I think I'm going to just make this a new segment from now on. New from Shinji Kanda. Shinji Kanda has quickly become my favorite illustrator in the TCG that's still producing cards. Obviously, Tokia still has the spot, but Tokia no longer produces cards. So, or no longer produces card art. So sad, but it is what it is. Shinji Kanda, however, is still active and has been going strong for a few sets now. So I'm just going to highlight the Aerodactyl from this set and the really awesome like line artwork that's been done here. The style is so cool. Like some people I've heard call it loud, but it's just really detailed in a way that you just don't see on other cards. I really like Shinji Kanda's artwork. This is, of course, the same artist that did like the really beautiful artwork for the Giratina V. So if you're familiar with that artwork, you'll recognize the style right away. All right. Of course, there is an Oddish in this set. We're going to look at the Oddish line. So we have Oddish, Gloom, and Vileplume. The Gloom and Vileplume both do some energy acceleration. They're not the best in terms of playability, but all the same, there's an Oddish in this set, so we got to highlight it real quick. All right, so before we get started with the actual top 10 itself, we're going to hit the honorable mentions. Honorable mentions in this case start out with Giovanni's Charisma. Giovanni's Charisma says, put an energy card attached to your opponent's active Pokemon into their hand. If you do, attach an energy card from your hand to your active Pokemon. So this card can be a pseudo energy acceleration card and a pseudo disruption card. So you're removing energy attachment that your opponent's had and you're giving yourself the opportunity to attach an energy, which can be kind of cool in a way because there's a very high chance that your opponent's active Pokemon has an energy attached to it. And this allows you to attach basically a second energy for turn. And what's cool too is that it says nothing about it being a basic energy. So theoretically, at least, you could attach, I don't another double turbo energy or V-Guard energy, some special energy card that you're really in need of. And this could do that for you. The only thing is, in a lot of cases, I feel like decks that want energy acceleration probably want better energy acceleration than this, but this is an option. You do have this choice, right? If you really need those special energy, you could do it. Maybe Wigglytuff wants us to get that extra special energy on there to power itself up, but the flip side of that is it can just play the regular Wigglytuff. So, meh. Will it see play? We'll see. Is it an interesting card? Absolutely. Speaking of Wigglytuff, Wigglytuff has the ability Expanding Body. If this Pokemon has any special energy attached, it gets 100 extra HP, which turns us into a 350 HP behemoth. However, something as simple as Path to Peak shuts that ability off, which means it goes back down to 250 HP. Not the greatest, but it is what it is. Wigglytuff does have the attack Friend Tackle, does 90 plus damage. If you played a supporter card from your hand during this turn, this attack does 90 more damage. So you could be doing 180 damage. You're probably playing a supporter card for turn. It's probably not Giovanni's Charisma, let's be honest. But if it is, it still counts, and you still do that 180 damage. And if you aren't having your ability shut off by Path to the Peak, Expanded Body is ensuring that you stay alive to do it again next turn. And maybe get scooped up with Sharon's Care to heal off all the damage. Speaking of Erica's Invitation, we saw Erica's Invitation in the opening earlier. Erica's Invitation has the effect: your opponent reveals their hand, put a basic Pokemon you find there onto their bench, then switch in that Pokemon to the active spot. So this is a combination of forcing your opponent to reveal their hand, and if there are any basic Pokemon, you immediately force that into the active spot. So you're just scooping it right up to the front. This has the effect of making it so that if they're holding onto a card like Luminion, they don't get to use the effect of that card because they did not play it on their turn. Additionally, you're putting it in the active spot. So if you happen to have something that can, eat that particular support Pokemon for lunch, then you get to take a nice knockout. However, as great as Erica is, Erica's Invitation is super situational and maybe best in control archetypes. Will it see play? Maybe. I think if there's a deck that's super heavy on basic Pokemon, which these future and ancient decks look like they might be when we get to Paradox Rift, maybe Erica's Invitation sees some play because your opponent might be holding on to some Pokemon in their hand, especially if there are support Pokemon in either of those archetypes. I could definitely see this being interesting. So something like a Crobat or a Dedenne, or even, something a little more recent like Squawkabilly. You wouldn't be holding on to Squawkabilly. I mean, you could, I guess. You would hold on to it because you didn't get a chance to use it. Maybe your turn 3 or something. Your opponent hits you with Erica's Invitation. Either way, because you wouldn't want to put it in play, right? Erica's Invitation would pull it, force it out, and you get the knockout. Easy 2 price cards. That said, I think this card is probably best in a format where something like Versus Seeker would exist, or something that could otherwise copy the effect of a supporter card in the discard pile, so that you're not reliant on trying to find this card. Even still, it's an interesting card, and it's one to be aware of. Definitely one to be aware of. Next up is Cycling Road. Cycling Road says, once during each player's turn, that player may discard a basic energy card from their hand. If they do, that player draws a card. Simple effect, but if you really, 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 really want energy in the discard pile, this could be a way to do it, and you get the side benefit of it drawing you a card. This is a very neutral card. Could be used in basically any deck that runs basic energy. I just don't know what the home is for it at the moment, right? Most decks would rather just run Radiant Greninja. This is, of course, a stadium bump, so if you're really afraid of Path of Peak, this does work to get rid of it. But there's just so many good stadiums right now that I feel like Cycling Road is maybe not the one. A lot of decks like Artisan, some decks like Beach Court. Cycling Road is kind of just a stadium in search of a deck. It's a cool effect, but I don't think it has a home yet. Maybe in the future. And then our final of the honorable mentions is Sandshrew. The ability is Sand Screen. Trainer cards in your opponent's discard pile can't be put into their opponent's deck by an effect of your opponent's item or supporter cards. And then it has Scratch that does 30 damage. So basically this is an anti-control deck card. So if they're trying to recover you know, I don't know. Let's say an expanded, because that would be more relevant for this particular situation. But let's say your opponent has a Versus Seeker and you have Sandshrew down. Versus Seeker would be unable to pull that card out, right? It says trainer cards in your opponent's discard pile can't be put into their deck by... Oh, actually, that's not Versus Seeker. That would be Pal Pad. Ignore everything I just said. Can't go to the deck, not their hand. Okay, so Pal Pad, not Versus Seeker. So it's a standard relevant. But if they really need the bosses for turn or bosses for game, and they're trying to cycle those bosses back in the deck because their deck's all small, you run the Pal Pad, throw those back in the deck. But if you have the Sandshrew down, suddenly that Pal Pad can't do it, right? And the same would be true of something like, let's say Silene goes to deck. So yeah, Silene would also be blocked, which would be really frustrating. You finally get 2 heads and then Sandshrew's like, nope. And because you would use it already, the effect is negated, but you've already used your supporter card for the turn. So Sandshrew, also a very situational card. Maybe doesn't see any play right away. Maybe doesn't see any play the whole time it's in the format, but it's one of those cards that's probably worth it to be aware of. All right. Now that I've rambled on about Sandshrew and misspoken on that one. Yeah, anyway, top 10. Let's actually look at the top 10 for the set. We're going to start out with Dodrio. Dodrio has the ability Zooming Draw. Once during your turn, you may put 1 damage counter on this Pokemon. If you do, draw a card. That's great. We played this with in our build for Tyranitar when we tested for 151 a few weeks ago. That extra draw is great. I will say this though. Dodrio putting damage on itself it makes it very, very tasty for decks that run Radiant Alakazam and for Sableye. That just means they get to play around with your damage and use it against you. That said, if you're not going against one of those decks, or if your opponent just sucks at playing the game, you do have access to Ballistic Beak. It does 10 plus damage, and it says this attack does 30 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So, if by some freak of nature you have managed to get 9 damage counters on this Pokemon, you are doing 280 damage for a single energy on a Stage 1 Pokemon. That's pretty cool. Now, will it take Sableye rotating to make this card interesting? Maybe. But it might get cool before then if Sableye isn't too much of a problem. Maybe the Jirachi is the savior, and the Jirachi coming out in Paradox Rift is the savior of the format, and we won't have to worry about that. And if it comes Paradox Rift, I doubt it. Let's just be straight with that. But this card's very cool. It's an interesting way to support a deck. It makes sure that you get damage counters on a Pokemon if you are in need of that. So stuff, again, like Tyranitar, like Hisuian Zork V-Star, both of these decks very much are in need of having a damaged bench Pokemon to do their best damage. So Dodrio is a card that very much fits the bill. And the fact that it's also a decent attacker in its own right and is a single prizer just makes it quite good. But it's at number 10 because there are better cards on this list. Blastoise. Blastoise has the ability Solid Shell. This Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks after applying weakness and resistance, which effectively makes this kind of a 360-ish HP Pokemon. So even if your opponent can one-shot you, they have to really reach for this guy to do so. It also has the attack Twin Cannons, 140 times damage. Discard up to 2 basic water energy cards from your hand. This attack does 140 damage for each card you discarded in this way. This means you're doing 280 damage simply by discarding 2 water energy. So something like an energy retrieval means and guarantees that you're doing your maximum damage with Blastoise. And since Blastoise is so bulky, you're going to probably outlast a lot of stuff. Interesting thing too, this is not going to be the case with 151, but come Paradox Rift, you will have access to Professor Churo's scenario, which for those of you who are not familiar with the card effect, but might be familiar with AZ, it is the same effect as AZ. So you pick up a Pokemon in play, and then everything attached to that Pokemon is discarded, but that Pokemon and its evolution line go to your hand. So let's say your opponent really smacks into this Blastoise and does 328 damage and doesn't quite take the knockout, but they're going to totally clean it up with the Sableye next turn. Not so fast. You hit AZ and Blastoise, or AZ, Professor Turo scenario, or an expanded AZ, and they no longer can do that cleanup. So very interesting. When we tested it with the Palkia, Origin Form Palkia V-Star. Honestly, it felt a lot like the deck was just Palkia with extra steps, which is probably the case. But having that extra bulk is kind of cool. That said, you are still weak to lightning. If it were weak to grass, I think it'd be really interesting. But Miraidon is not going away. It does appear that Miraidon is very much going to continue to see success in the current standard format. So that does make Blastoise and Palkia by extension just a little too vulnerable to see too much success right now. At number 8, we have Big Air Balloon. Big Air Balloon says the stage 2 Pokemon this card is attached to has no retreat cost. Basically, this is a float stone, but only for stage 2 Pokemon. Will it see play? Yeah, I think it probably will. Will it see a lot of play? We'll see. Probably not. Depends on if they go a very stage 2 heavy meta, and it looks like, at least with the reveals of Paradox Rift, that's probably not going to be the case. However, this card is worth considering, right? If you're having to switch out and in with your stage 2s, having one of these or a couple of these in play, probably pretty helpful. And let's be frank, the effect of Float Stone is super good, and Big Air Balloon, even though it is limited to a stage 2 Pokemon, the effect is definitely worth considering. Next up, we have Alakazam. Alakazam has the attack Mind Jack, which does 90 plus damage. This attack does 30 more damage for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. That can add up very quickly, right? You can get up to 240 fairly quick. And then on top of all of that, you have a very unique attack, the first we've ever seen of this type in the Pokemon trading card game. Dimensional Hand, 120 damage. This attack can be used even if this Pokemon is on the bench. Yes, that's right, ladies and gents. Alakazam can attack from the bench. Typically in Pokemon, you have to have your Pokemon in the active spot to attack. Alakazam says, nah, I can use Dimensional Hand from the bench. I'm cool. So you can throw something like a Klefki or a Mimikyu in the active spot and just kind of smack your opponent's Pokemon around with Dimensional Hand. And if you want to finish something off, you can throw Mind Jack, or you can throw Alakazam in the active spot and use Mind Jack to knock that Pokemon out. It's a very interesting card. I don't know how meta it's going to be, considering how fast the meta is right now. Alakazam is kind of slow, unfortunately. And 120 damage is not very much. But if the wall Pokemon that you're putting in the active spot is successful at walling your opponent's active Pokemon, Alakazam might just be the trick for you. And I tell you one thing, it's definitely a fun deck to play. At number 6, we have Rigid Band. The stage 1 Pokemon this card is attached to takes 30 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon after applying weakness and resistance. So we played this with the Wigglytuff that we showed earlier in the honorable mentions. Wigglytuff already kind of a bulky behemoth. Rigid Band making it even tankier. Yeah, it is what it is, really. It's just, it says no, right? No, you're not going to take that one shot because now you need 30 extra damage, or no, now it's a 3-shot, right? It's one of those cards that's just worth considering. Stage 1 Pokemon are probably going to be pretty good for a while. Even with stuff like the Devolution TM, you can re-evolve fairly quickly. I think it's worth considering. It's definitely a good tool card. Definitely worth having in your toolbox. Probably have, at least 2 or 3 copies of it. 4, because it's probably going to be cheap. Might as well have it just in case some random deck needs 4 copies. But yeah, Rigid Band, absolutely good to have. Next up, we have Grabber. Grabber says your opponent reveals their hand, choose a Pokemon you find there, and put it on the bottom of their deck. This card is an interesting one, right? This card is actually seeing play in Japan, and it's a little puzzling, I will admit, because the disruption level, yes, it does exist, right? If your opponent has that Pokemon they really need for their next turn, you can throw it on the bottom, but you have to know that it's there or have a very strong suspicion that it's there to wipe that Pokemon out. However, this card also can be used in Mew as a pseudo disruption card that also thins your hand. It's kind of interesting how Mew just finds use in the most random cards, but it has found success with Grabber in Japan, at least. So we'll see if the Western meta adapts and uses Grabber here, or maybe it'll be like some Japanese adaptations where we just choose to ignore it. We shall see. For number 4, I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of cheating on this one. Instead of doing a specific card, I'm just gonna have a generic Prevolutions cluster. These cards, they're not specifically good. They're just better than the Prevolutions that existed already in the format. So obviously decks that ran the Pidgeot X line, for a quick search, they might instead choose to play this Pidgey because it has Call for Family, which is a huge boon. 70 HP Charmander, of course, very good. This 100 HP Charmeleon has Fire Blast and a Combustion, both of which can be very useful when you're trying to deal with something like a Mimikyu. Very useful to use the Charmeleon, as we learned in our testing for 151 against Alakazam. And then Scyther, of course, if you happen to be running a Scissor deck, this is probably the one you're going to want to evolve from. 70 HP, it has Free Retreat, which is super good. And then it has Helpful Slash, would do that 20 damage, and accelerate a little bit of energy from your discard pile. All in all, these four cards, they're all worth it, right? They're all worth having. Grab playsets of each of them. They're commons and uncommons. They're going to be pennies a few weeks after the set releases. Just grab them. If you're playing a deck that's going to want them, grab them earlier, pay a little bit extra. But yeah, just have them in your arsenal. You'll want them. So again, Pidgey, Call for Family, Charmander with Blazing Destruction. Your Charmander's biggest benefit is that 70 HP. Charmeleon, again, Fire Blast. That Fire Blast is very handy against Mimikyu because Charizard X, it turns out, can't hit a Pokemon that walls Pokemon V and Pokemon X. Who knew? Everyone knew, of course, but all the same. And then Scyther, again, Helpful Slash and Free Retreat, 70 HP, also a big benefit. Just a good Scyther to have in your arsenal. Next up, we have Ditto. Ditto has the ability Change Start. This ability can only be used if this Pokemon is in the active spot and only on your first turn. Search your deck for a basic Pokemon except any Ditto. If you do, discard this Pokemon and all attached cards and put that Pokemon in its place. Then shuffle your deck. And then, of course, Ditto has the all-important, almighty Goo for 10 damage. Change Start is a real reason you're running this deck, as fun as the meme for Goo is. This is kind of a fifth of whatever card you want to start with. Maybe you really, really, really want to start with Luminion V for some reason. I mean, you could start with Ditto and then change it out. Yeah. You're not going to do that. But if you really want a Comfey, this could be what is effectively a fifth Comfey, right? You throw the Ditto on the active spot, pop this Change Start, search your deck for a Comfey, put a Comfey down in the active spot, and voila, you have a Comfey. It helps guarantee that you don't have as bad of a start as often, because this Pokemon is now a way to guarantee that you're more likely to get the starter card that you want. How many of these are going to be running a deck? That's kind of an interesting one. I've seen Japanese lists run from 1 all the way up to 4. 4 seems extremely excessive, but 1 or 2 probably is fine. If you really, really want to start, though, I guess you could run 4. But yeah, I think 1 or 2 is probably fine to have. And then again, which decks are going to play this? We'll really see. I think I'm not sure how many decks this is that important to. And even on the decks that they would kind of like this, I think they probably would rather run other cards. So we'll see. But yeah, Ditto definitely worth getting because it is going to see play. It's seeing a decent amount of play in Japan, so it'll see play here. Zapdos takes number 2. This one kind of surprises me. I looked into Japanese data, of course, for this whole top 10. And it's been very interesting to see Zapdos doing so well, especially in Miraidon builds. It turns out it's a very good attacker against Lost Box. Who knew? You're knocking out a weak Pokemon in the active spot. You're knocking out a weak Pokemon on the bench. But you also have Free Retreat when you have an energy attached to it. So Zapdos kind of just an all-around good guy here. Zapdos doing what it's supposed to do. Doing that 120 active, doing that 90 snipe. Yeah, Miraidon likes this guy. Miraidon also likes our number 1. Actually, a lot of decks like our number 1. Turns out, we're getting ready to lose Mew here with rotation in like 5 or 6 months probably. So the Mew V, VMAX, they're all going. They're going to go goodbye. But we don't get to lose Mew from the format. Actually, Celebrations Mew would also be leaving because that's also rotating. However, this Mew is going to come in and save the day so that we don't have to play in a format without Mew because we all know that everybody loves Mew so much. That said, Sorry, I'm being a little too facetious. The ability here is Restart. Now, this ability is super good. Once during your turn, you may draw cards until you have 3 cards in your hand. You may recognize this as Instruct. From a Sun and Moon base set, there was an Oranguru that had Instruct that did exactly this. Now, that was a single prizer, so there is that. But Mew's utility does not end there. Mew also has Genome Hacking, which is an attack that for 3 colorless energy says, choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. So for 3 energy, you're able to copy any attack that your opponent's active Pokemon has. That's pretty crazy. That means if they have a Radiant Greninja in the active spot, well, Moonlight Shuriken sure sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? Could take a nice little snipe. Or maybe you just gusted that little Radiant Greninja to the active spot so you could snipe. That's a possibility. Or maybe your opponent has Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. Well, guess we're going to do some rapid flowing, aren't we? The possibilities here are endless. I have seen Mew in quite a few Japanese lists, most notably in Lugia builds and in Miraidon builds. It can be used to hit weakness against Urshifu. It can be used. It's just super good. This card is absolutely going to see play. Do not miss out on grabbing a set of these cards. Grab at least a couple. Decks are going to run at least one. A lot of decks will at least. So definitely have one on hand for your deck building. Mew, without a doubt, is the top card from 151. Again, when I was doing research for this video on the cards that were going to be the most impactful for 151, this card just sings, right? It is all over the Japanese meta, and I highly expect it will be all over ours as well. That said, that is going to be the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this bonus video this week. If you want to learn a little bit more about 151 and maybe even about Paradox Rift, you can jump on to justinbasil.com. And of course, thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.